President Trump's former chief White House strategist, Steve Bannon, appeared at a virtual hearing in New York today. Earlier this month, Bannon was arrested on board a luxury yacht near Connecticut on charges related to wire fraud and money laundering. Manhattan federal prosecutors and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service say he and 3 others hatched a scheme to defraud hundreds of thousands of donors who gave money for President Trump's border wall. The online fundraising operation raised more than $25 million to build sections of the wall in New Mexico. Bannon is accused of taking more than $1 million for himself. President Trump has since distanced himself from his former advisor, saying he didn't like the fundraising project for showboating reasons. Bannon faces up to 40 years in prison. He has pleaded not guilty to the charges. For more analysis, let's bring in CBSN legal contributor Keir Dougall. Keir, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Remind us of the charges Steve Bannon is facing and what exactly happened in court today.
So the summary that you just gave, Tanya, was very good. He's facing charges for wire fraud and for money laundering. Those are very serious charges. You noted that the maximum possible sentence would be 40 years. It's likely that the final sentence, if he's convicted, would be significantly less than that, but still real time with a loss in the neighborhood of $1 million. With so many victims, with Bannon likely to be, viewed as a leader here, I would guess somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 years final sentence based on what we know right now. It's a serious case. What happened today in court was that the other 3 defendants entered their pleas of not guilty, and the court set discovery and trial dates. Looks like the trial will occur in late spring, so it will not of next year. So it will not occur before the election.
So, Keir, according to the Wall Street Journal, a media company linked to Bannon and an exiled Chinese businessman is also under federal investigation. The yacht on which Bannon was arrested earlier this month belongs to that businessman. What do we know about that case and what it could mean for Bannon?
Well, talk about your bad optics. To get arrested on a luxury yacht outside of, off the coast of Connecticut, while you're being accused of this large swindle for hundreds of thousands of President Trump's supporters. But those are not, as you mentioned, Mr. Bannon's only legal issues. There are reports that there is a securities fraud investigation relating to a private placement, a $300 million private placement that Mr. Bannon was involved in with this exiled Chinese businessman relating to a potential social media startup. So that's what's in box number 2. And there are also reports of a potential referral to the Justice Department for untruthful comments to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So Mr. Bannon has a potential big basket of legal issues. I think the question we're going to be looking for now, or the questions are going to be, does Bannon try to cooperate? Does he have something to offer to the prosecutors to work some of this time off, this potentially large exposure? And how will President Trump react? Of course, we've seen him react by pardoning or commuting sentences.
Speaking of the sentence that he pardoned for Roger Stone, for instance, so you think that that's a possibility here? Do you think that even though the president has distanced himself from Steve Bannon publicly, do you think perhaps it is something he is privately considering?
I think it's something we should continue to look for. We've seen President Trump making statements that have seemed to move across sort of different facets of whether or not a particular individual is in his favor or has fallen out of favor. But you're correct to point to the Roger Stone commutation. That's one that looks like it is potentially, based on the statements that he made and Roger Stone made, potentially corrupt. that the Roger Stone was trying to protect the president, and the president was trying to prevent that Roger Stone's information from coming out. If Mr. Bannon is in a similar situation, I think we'll want to watch to see whether or not those issues come up with Mr. Bannon.
Because correct me if I'm wrong here, but to me this appears to be a pretty straightforward follow the money kind of case. I mean, prosecutors can point to the money that came in and where the money went out, right? So it's pretty hard, I think, to hide that. What kind of defense could Bannon mount?
Right. So I don't think we'd be talking about this case if it didn't involve one of the president's high advisors. It is a fairly straightforward meat and potatoes fraud case. It looks like Mr. Bannon's crew assumed that nobody else could read because a number of their text messages were included in the indictment, which are damning if proved to be true. He can try to claim that the money that was spent through the nonprofit that was alleged to be used as a shell wasn't really the money from the We Build the Wall campaign. He can try to claim that that although there may have been this swindle going on, that he didn't know about it. He can try to claim that the statements, you know, he could look for statements to see if there are any statements that call into doubt the claims that none of the money would be used except to build the wall. If there's some other statements out there that qualify that, those he could potentially use as a defense as well. Those are the top line things that I think I'd be looking for if I were representing him.
All right, Keir, so switching gears quickly, as you know, today a federal appeals court ruled against a request by Michael Flynn and the Justice Department seeking to shut down the criminal case against the president's former national security advisor. Earlier this year, Attorney General William Barr dropped charges against Flynn after he pleaded guilty to lying under oath to the FBI. So remind us what the status of Flynn's case is and explain what this new ruling means. Right.
So William Barr's Justice Department moved to dismiss Michael Flynn's case on the theory that his lies, admitted lies, weren't material. That is confounding to many legal scholars because what you recall what happened is that Mr. Flynn made statements to the Russian ambassador asking for some, for the Russians to go easy in their response to President Obama's throwing out some of the Russian diplomats. Mr. Flynn then made false statements about that to the vice president and others, and those statements became public. So at that moment, the Russians knew what Mr. Flynn had actually said, and they knew that he was lying in public, and that made him vulnerable to blackmail. And so asking about what he knew and what he had said was definitely material to the FBI's mission to protect the national security. Mr. Barr moved on the ground to dismiss on the ground that the allegations weren't material. And so Judge Sullivan, who's the trial judge, then asked to have another independent party come in and argue the position as to why the case should not be dismissed. Mr. Flynn took an emergency appeal, which initially was granted, but today was overruled by the entire D.C. Circuit, sending the sentencing proceeding back to Judge Sullivan, the trial court, who will now conduct a hearing to see whether or not there was any impropriety in the Justice Department's motion to throw out Flynn's case. If the judge finds that, he can go ahead and sentence Mr. Flynn. If he finds that the motion is well grounded, then he can dismiss the charges against Michael Flynn.
All right, so the Flynn saga continues, at least for now. Well, Keir Dougall, thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate you sharing your legal expertise with us.
Thank you, Tanya.